Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of July 27th, 2020. Before I begin analyzing the aspects, I would just like to say a couple of words because that is the kind of week that we're going to have. So no matter how strong you are, no matter how faithful, no matter how spiritual you are, no matter how solid your inner truth is, everyone has moments of downfall, everyone has moments of weakness. We must always remember that yes, absolutely, our spirits are infinite, they are immortal, they're divine, they're capable of anything, but we are here in a human form, so we are extremely fragile, and chances are that most of us don't even realize how very, very vulnerable and fragile we are. So it's perfectly okay to have moments of doubt, to have moments when we just cannot make sense of everything that is happening in our lives and especially within ourselves. So what I'm saying is it's okay not to be okay. We're not robots, we're not titans, we're not gods. We're simply human beings trying our very, very best to survive in a jungle basically with as much dignity, with as much humanity, with as much grace and honor as we can possibly muster up. But there are always going to be moments in life when everything feels like it turns against us, when the whole world, even the divine, is playing against our happiness, our well being, our wishes, our desires, our wills. But ultimately, the universe is always flowing, nothing is set in stone, so we should not take anything personally. This is basically just the quiet before the storm, but this is where the storm is already brewing. This is where, for example, symbolically, the insects and everything that precedes the storm is already in the air. We already know the inevitable. So of course we are frightened. Of course we are a little bit worried. Of course we simply don't know how we are going to survive the storm. So we have moments when our faith is especially thin, but healthy faith always questions itself. Everyone, even the most zen people, have moments of anger, have moments of frustration. All of us have moments when we're not our own best friends, and it is absolutely fine. It is a much healthier option to simply confront it, accept it, feel it through, no matter how anxious, no matter how depressing, no matter how oppressive all of it feels. But at least we're honest with ourselves, and when we're honest with ourselves, we're honest with the divine. There are moments in life when we have to surrender everything and even close our eyes to injustice and just feel gratitude for everything that we have, to feel gratitude for our existence. But there are other times in life when the injustice is so grave that ignorance or peaceful surrender is simply not an option. Of course, this doesn't mean taking any violent action. This just means we have to be honest with ourselves, with other people, and ultimately the divine, that when something exceeds the measure, well, no one can accept us to be happy, to be overjoyed, or to embody peace and serenity when even the sky asks us to revolt against injustices, to revolt against all those things that simply make our lives unpleasant, oppressive, and unfair. Admitting our weakness, admitting our frailty, admitting that basically our hearts are simply made out of glass, despite the inner fire burning with the flames of 1,000 suns, despite the fact that passion can simply elevate us to divine heights, yet still our hearts are simply made of glass, and there are times when they shatter. And it's absolutely fine to admit this, to show it, to reveal our own vulnerability, much more so when all of us are basically in the same boat. So no one is going to do better than another person. When it hurts all of us. So this is one of those very rare moments when being a superhero, when trying obsessively to overcome our limitations, may lead to self-sacrifice, martyrdom, and especially emotionally more so true than in any other way. Because when we have a full basket full of the most delightful fruits, we have a lot to share. But when our baskets are empty, there's nothing really to share. So this is one of the weeks when self-care is absolutely essential and imperative. Of course, this isn't meant to frighten or depress anyone, because there's always solution to every single problem. There's always a hidden opportunity in any quicksand. The universe, nature, reality itself is made in such a way that there's always a rope somewhere that we can at least hold on to survive, not to sink even deeper. So of course there is hope, there is faith, there is compassion, solidarity in the sky at the same time. If we're too proud to admit that we actually need help, well, that help is not going to come. But the reason why I'm saying this is that I'm almost 1,000,000% that every single soul listening to this horoscope, listening to this channel, is a person who is embodying compassion, mercy, solidarity. So it would be your natural instinct to give everything that you have to make other people feel a little bit better, which is absolutely fine. But this is one of those moments when you actually have to ask as well, when you actually need to think about your own emotional needs as well. Now we start the week with a very hard aspect, one of many unfortunately, and we're talking about Mercury squaring Mars. Of course, this isn't anything new. This energy has been present in the sky for some time now. Once when Mercury was retrograde, now when Mercury is going direct, exiting shadow. And this pretty much means angry words. It means expressing your raw and honest emotions, no matter of the consequences. This means speaking out your truth, having courage to challenge anyone, having courage to stand up for yourself, especially verbally, emotionally, no matter what. And of course, in itself, this isn't anything negative. This is actually quite positive, because all of us need to be courageous. All of us need moments in our lives when we have to embody the inner warrior. But this is the type of energy where, at the same time, this courage is fueled by a Freudian type of depression, a very silent depression, where we have been tolerant, quiet, self-sufficient for way too long, and now this is bursting out. The volcano is erupting. And since Mercury is in the sign of Cancer, well, unfortunately, it may be our family, our loved ones, our dearest friends, or maybe for some people even the self, who is on the receiving end of the frustration, of the conflict, of the angry words. But this aspect is going to get a little bit, or maybe much worse, around the 30th of July, because this is where we are going to have a T-square, where it isn't just Mercury that Mars is going to square, but also Jupiter in Capricorn. And this also means that Mercury is going to be opposing Jupiter. So this will be one of the moments when the energy, especially emotionally, especially psychologically, is going to feel really, really heavy. It is going to challenge our relationships. It is going to challenge everyone who we communicate with. It is going to challenge our faith, our inner truth. We will want justice. We will want equality, fairness, equity. But at the same time, Mercury opposing Jupiter means that we also have to accept compromises. We also have to accept imperfection. We also have to accept that so very many things don't depend on us. Some things, even in our lives, even in our personal stories, even in our karmic journeys, simply do not depend on us. So this is one of the moments when we have to practice the prayer of serenity, as in, give me the strength to change what I can, give me the courage to accept what I cannot change, and give me the wisdom to know the difference between the two. But because Mercury is also going to oppose Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, one after the other, this is going to feel really, really heavy, and chances are that everything happening on the world stage, Capricorn basically, is going to contribute a great deal to our frustration, to our unhappiness, to our conflicts, to our dissatisfaction. And when it's a conflict, as in a tension between Mars and Jupiter, Jupiter expands everything it touches, and Mars is its home sign of Aries. So that means that we are going to embody the inner warrior one way or another, and the very first action that inner warrior is going to take is speak its mind. Mercury in Cancer. Actually, speak its heart, speak its feelings, speak the totality of what emotion means. May it be rational, irrational, emotional, subconscious, conscious, it doesn't really matter, because we just have to express ourselves at this moment. Of course, the positive side of this is, Mars squaring Jupiter, the hand of justice. People who made mistakes, Jupiter in Capricorn is bosses, is leaders, it is, heads of states. All the big people are going to be facing trials, justice, or at least they're going to be severely challenged by the individual. Mars in Aries is the individual. So this is one of those moments when the storm is really, really going to brew. In my personal opinion, it is not going to explode yet, it is still contained. But Mercury opposing Pluto, Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, misuse, abuse of power. Saturn in its home sign of Capricorn, rules, regulations, limitations. Some of those limitations being extreme, unacceptable, which go against the will of the majority. And when Mercury opposes this, yes, on one hand, it is that we don't have a choice, we have to compromise, we have to accept what we have. But Mercury is the planet of the mind, so it will sink very, very deeply into our memories, whatever is gonna be forced upon us. Especially Jupiter, legislation, laws, regulation, rules, in a very official way. And Pluto, now this is where basically the hidden gem lies. Pluto is long-term secrets. It is like one of the biggest guarded secrets which simply cannot be exposed, because if it's exposed, it's gonna change everything. But when Mercury opposes this Pluto, well, chances are that either officially or just intuitively or just, in alternative ways, as in maybe the internet, social media, conspiracies, etc., we are going to become aware. And after we become aware, Mercury will head into Leo. That is what's coming next for Mercury. Of course, not this week, but still it is building up, and Leo is the heart. It is the heart space. When Mercury enters this sign, it will basically make us react through our heart spaces to everything that, entered our awareness. And even though Mercury will still be stressed out, so to speak, the heart, even the physical heart, as in the flesh heart, has neurons, so it has an intelligence of its own. It has a very unique and distinctive electromagnetic field of its own. So this means that the heart, in many different ways and from very many different perspectives, well, it cannot be controlled. It is a sovereign power that rules our beings. Even those people who adapt a 100% rational way of living and just dismiss the intelligence, the sacredness, the wisdom of the heart, well, the heart can affect their choices and decision-making processes through nervous system. So it's no problem at all. The heart never asks why. The heart cannot be controlled. No matter what we do, it is still going to come to the surface one way or another. But if all of this wasn't enough, well, when we had the Venus retrograde squaring Neptune, and that was an extremely confusing and almost maddening energy, because Venus is in the dual sign of Gemini. Now this square is going to perfect for the third and final time, but fortunately this can have totally different expressions for different people. For example, for those who are in an established bond and they survived this Venus retrograde period, and this, all the challenges and all the thoughts, all the doubts, all the emotional ups and downs actually strengthen their bond. Well, this is when, that stress, when the challenges just taught them valuable lessons, and it is those lessons that are going to be their saving graces. Like, let me just give you an example. Even if the world burns around us, as long as you and your lover have each other, it's absolutely fine. Because love is sacred. But for those who are single and were looking very strongly, and that Venus retrograde squaring Neptune might have disillusioned them and told them, well, it's better to be single, or better to be single rather than to compromise, better to be single than to tolerate another person, better to be single than to deceive another person that you like them just for the sheer sake of not being alone. Well, these feelings might return, but in a different way. This is when you might ask yourself, well, what am I doing wrong in love? Is being honest with myself and other people, is having high moral standards and principles, and desiring like the true unconditional love, is that a bad thing? Is that a mistake? Is that not supported by the universe? So this can lead to a little bit of heartache. This can lead to a little bit of emotional pain. And, even, of course, yes, absolutely, this is a confusion. Because Neptune retrograde is like a very dense fog and mist of confusion which just doesn't allow the light to reach you. But chances are that this time you're not gonna ask yourself these high philosophical questions, but rather you will ask the divine, as in Neptune, connection to the source. Why me? Why is this happening in my life? Where is my mistake? What am I doing wrong? Is my heart not pure? Am I not living up to the standards, my own standards? So this can just add to the frustration. This can just complicate things. But on the other hand, for other people, this can actually be a solution to everything. Because when these two planets speak in such a manner, given the fact that Neptune is simply the higher octave, the superior expression of Venus, this can represent escapism, this can represent the joys even though if it's an illusionary joy, it is still joy. It is still enough to get you through the day. It is still enough to de-stress you, take you out of the worry zone, break your connection with the news, with outer reality, with all the turmoil that is going on the world stage. Just that you must know the measure, because there is a very strong risk of overdoing it, because at the same time, Neptune sextiles Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of expansion. Yes, it is a highly spiritual, optimistic, faithful energy, but if you overdo it, it can be even lethal in some cases if that escapism involves substances, even alcohol. And always remember, the higher you go, the way down, the fall is going to be that much longer and that much more painful. Now I would like to return to an energy that I spoke about earlier, which was part of the T-square. Mars squaring Jupiter. A square is an astrological aspect of maximum tension, 90 degrees, so it is very severe, it is very strong, and Jupiter is the planet of expansion. Retrograde means that it's embodied that much more, it is turned inwards, and Jupiter has much to do with law, justice, fairness, etc. And Mars is the warrior, so this translates to self-righteousness. So whenever this aspect is active, the crime rates, violence, bursts of anger, anything that has anything to do with assertive energies, it's going to be that much more amplified. And chances are that it's still going to brew inside of us, because Jupiter is also inner truth. So first of all, before we explode, before we take any action, we have to process exactly why we want to do what we want to do. And another aspect of this energy is that, like earthly justice, Jupiter in Capricorn has to fail us, or we have to mistrust it, lose all faith, lose all credibility in it. And then of course, the only thing that remains is the awakening of the inner warrior, self-righteousness, taking justice in our own hands, standing up for what we believe in, which isn't really a bad thing, but when we overdo it, and especially those people who usually operate outside the law, who are very familiar and quite comfortable with illegal activities, or their lifestyle has violence in it on a daily basis, those people are definitely going to explode, and they won't care what and who they have to step over to satisfy their inner Mars. So, this aspect might greatly increase criminal activities, crime rates, violence, anger, impulsiveness. But of course, fortunately, for some people it will just represent taking legal action, which is, at least it's symbolically a battle and a war, and it's enough. That is exactly why courts of justice exist, so that this ideological or principle war, or whatever might make you feel disadvantaged, can be fought out there. But regardless, legal action is very, very likely, because Jupiter is conjunct Pluto, and by now Saturn also starts to get very, very close to them. So this can very well mean big organizations, big corporations, big pharma that are going to be either sued by a lot of people, or a lot of people will demand justice, legal action, penalizing them or revealing something, investigations, and centralized power will basically have no other choice but to comply. At the same time, Mars in Aries is the archetype of the police, of the law enforcement, so we can also see this in action, because Mars activates it more than ever, because Jupiter expands everything that Mars can actually represent in its home sign of Aries. If all of this wasn't enough, we have another square in the sky, which is just a faint energy at the very beginning of the week, but by the very end of the week, as in 2nd of August, going to be exact. We're talking about the Sun in Leo being squared by Uranus in Taurus. Now this energy can have so very many different interpretations, layers to it. On one hand, its most common and global expression, Uranus in Taurus, our value systems, the change of our value systems. The Sun in Leo, the self, our identity, our heart, the passion inside our hearts. And when these two power players converse in tension, well, it can represent a very strong reaction to the economic crisis, to how centralized power may be handling the economic side of things, imminent poverty, imminent economic collapse, problem with the banks, problems, with online banking. Maybe the systems are gonna crash, and people are definitely going to rise up. They are going to demand equality, because Uranus is the planet of, equality, almost perfect equality. And in Taurus, well, equality regarding values, regarding money, regarding resources, an equal, sharing of resources where everyone gets at least something, everyone has at least a little bit of advantage or help or support. But at the same time, Leo also rules risks, so it is not a very favorable moment to make any financial, material risks, in huge investments, to go blindly into something, because chances are it might backfire. The only way this energy can work, if you're absolutely certain of yourself, if you possess like the most superior knowledge, because then you already embody the higher qualities of Uranus, and then this square is definitely going to work in your favor. But who possesses that high level of intelligence? Who possesses absolute foresight? Well, chances are either very, very, very few people or artificial intelligence, but the rest of us do not. Uranus is also in the earth sign of Taurus, and every earth sign has at least a little bit to do with our physical bodies. So don't do any extreme sports, don't take any physical risks. And Uranus is revolution, it is rebellion, it is impulsivity, it is, Uranus in Taurus, basically volcano. Don't allow the volcano to erupt, because it can be very, very risky. If there are violent protests, if there are violent uprisings, or if there are invitations to take part in such an activity, well, you must embody wisdom and don't take any violent, assertive action which that could basically terminate your life even. Out of the two power players, Uranus is definitely the stronger energy, and physically Leo rules heart. The Sun is there activating this sign. So let's be sure that our heart doesn't stop because we take some silly action which we haven't thought through. This is a very, very impulsive, volcanic, violent aspect, so we must really, really, really control our tempers. At the same time, a totally different expression of this energy, well, it can represent severe anxiety, it can represent, like our nervous system is on fire, it can represent huge spikes in the Schumann resonance, so the electromagnetic field of the earth and even of our brains and, Sun and Leo, our hearts, can, suffer disruptions, spikes, so that will leave us feeling very strangely in a very anxious state physically. So if you might just basically wake up with severe anxiety and you have absolutely no idea why, well, this is why. And don't panic. Do not allow it to turn into a panic attack, because this aspect is going to break up quite quickly. Yet another expression of this energy is, Taurus rules sensuality, Taurus rules earthly pleasures, Leo rules love, as in the fiery passion of love. It is the home of the sun, so the sun is in its home sign, so it is extremely passionate. But sometimes passion is, like a temptation, and Uranus is the planet of shocks, the planet of surprises. When they converse together in this way, it is a very, very quick and volatile energy. So what this means is, maybe we can fall in love with a very unusual person, with the archetype of the outsider, the archetype of the rebel, the archetype of the nonconformist, someone who lives their lives solely on risks, where every single day is a new risk or a new level of risk. So before you would enter into such a relationship or fall in love, allow yourself to fall in love blindly, think things through very, very deeply. Uranus would definitely want you to step out of your comfort zone and try new things and allow yourself to try new things. But maybe the present moment is not very ideal, neither very fortunate, to have anything to do with taking risks, even in matters of the heart, even in matters of love. Yet a totally different kind of expression of this energy. Well, Uranus in Taurus is the crust of the earth, and Uranus is the planet of magnetism, so it is tectonic movement, which can represent a massive earthquake, which can represent a volcanic eruption, or very unusual violent weather phenomenon. And at the same time, the ruler of Taurus, Venus, forms a square with Neptune. Neptune is water, Neptune is oceans, Neptune is the seas, that can also represent tsunami, that can also represent floods. It can represent natural calamity. Yet another expression of this energy, well, Uranus in Taurus represents technology. Leo is always risk, so it can be an accident, it can be a man-made disaster, a very unfortunate accident, for example, which might have to do with the element of fire. Leo is fire, and even though Mars doesn't converse yet with anything in the sign of Leo, well, it's still in its home sign of Aries, so it is absolutely relevant, as in fire energy. So it can be risk of fire hazards, it can be explosions. And last but not least, another layer to this energy, well, the sun in Leo activates the inner child, and the inner child wants pleasure. The inner child wants to play, it wants to be a child, it wants to be free. And when it squares Uranus, well, Uranus just amplifies that infinitely. So chances are that the inner child might be really, really mischievous. It might be really, really naughty, but in a very unpleasant way, because it might want to force us to have at least something pleasurable in our lives, to have a fun activity, to go out there and be free. And Uranus doesn't really care about the rules and regulations. It just wants what it wants. And when it comes to the inner child, when the inner child is undisciplined by nature, so we must be very, very careful, because this energy might simply attract us to the wrong playmates, so to speak, the wrong people. So stepping out of our comfort zones and doing something which is absolutely not typical for us and who we are, sometimes it's a risk which pays off handsomely, but other times, especially right now, it is not the most inspired and best idea. Now moving on, there is another energy in the sky, which I also talked about. Mercury standing across the sky from Jupiter. Now Jupiter is the planet of fate, as I said. In its home sign of Sagittarius, it rules religion, religious beliefs. It rules our highest philosophies, worldviews, and even religious views. So one way or another, it has much to do with the divine. And Jupiter is sextiling Neptune. So, Neptune is the source. Neptune is the inner divine, the divine spark, the higher self. So when Mercury stands across the sky from Jupiter in this configuration, well, it can mean angry words directed to the divine, revolt against the divine, expressing our true heartfelt pains to the divine, being very ungrateful, blaming the divine for all injustices that are present in our lives. It can also be a very strong and bitter disillusion when our prayers, our hopes, our faith is not, or actually is met by total silence. Nothing happens. No sign, no encouragement, no miraculously feeling better. So this might represent a very strong anger directed to the divine. Now, on one hand, sometimes you just have to express yourself. If this is what you truly feel inside your heart, but not really an impulsive way, even after you really philosophize, think things through, and just reach the conclusion, well, that this isn't fair no matter how we look at it, well, then the only chance you have is actually to express yourself, to speak your truth, to tell your pain to the divine mind, without fear of retaliation, because honesty is the supreme virtue above all things. So when this is what we truly feel, then this is what we have to communicate, even if our dialogue partner is the divine mind, the divine intelligence, call it whatever you want. But if we are just impulsive, if we are just self-righteous, if we are just frustrated, if we haven't thought anything through, if it's just something that, comes from our nervous system, is a result of anxiety or severe frustration or the Freudian kind of depression, well, then we really have to measure our words, because the most extreme and truly the ugliest expression of this energy is curses directed to the divine, and that will definitely have consequences. If we want justice in our lives, divine justice, well, then we have to embody a very positive example. We have to embody measure, equilibrium, discipline, balance. A call for help, a call for justice is one thing, but cursing and attacking through words, affirmations have a lot of power. That is absolutely unacceptable. But speaking about the divine, I said so very many horrible aspects and so very many bad news until this present point, but this is where I also have to mention the more positive and uplifting energy. Mercury from Cancer forms a supremely harmonious trine with Neptune from its home sign of Pisces. So this absolutely represents the opposite of what I just said. This represents positive affirmations based on faith, based on purity of your heart. This is where you can outbelieve any problem in your life. This is not gonna come easy this time. That is without a shadow of a doubt. Because psychologically, we're going to be challenged from every single angle. A symbolic way to represent this energy, if you're familiar with tarot, the Eight of Swords, where we are blindfolded and swords are sticking into us from every single angle. So that is basically how we're going to be feeling, or better said, maybe the Ten of Swords, where we're definitely ultimately defeated, we're lying dead on the ground and 10 swords are sticking in our back. And yet, there is still hope. There is still faith. We still embody our divine sparks. And ultimately, the divine is strong enough, and when we motivate it through our faith, through our purity, through our devotion, Sun in Leo, through the purity and the most supreme expression of what the heart is, the sacred, immaculate heart, well, then is when we can miraculously turn everything to its opposite. Then is when we become portals for miracles. Neptune trining Mercury, prayer, blessed words, calling the spirit and the divinity, whatever that means to you. Even if you're a totally non-religious person, you still have a subconscious, you still have a higher self, you still have an intelligence which you cannot tap into in a human way. You can always call what the divine means for you personally to help you. You can bless other people. It is also the power of compassion. It is also reaching out to help and hoping that there is someone out there, even in the most arcane corners in the world, that maybe they can help you. No matter how horrible, how bad, how depressive, how hopeless the situation is, there is always hope there. Hope is a power that is hand in hand with the human condition. It cannot be defeated. Hope is what we human beings actually are. And if anything, our history proves this over and over and over again. Because if we're honest, humankind suffered worse crisis than this one. And yet it wasn't enough to defeat the hearts of people. It wasn't enough to defeat the symbolism of cancer. People still loved each other. People still formed families. People still stuck together no matter what. And that is why we're here today. Because our ancestors held on to hope. And not only, do we have this power right now, the power of prayer, the blessing of divine words, the blessing of this divine inspiration, but Neptune forms sextiles with Jupiter, Pluto, and a very faint sextile even with Saturn. So that also represents celestial power, inner power, faith, inspiration, dreaming miracles or solutions into existence, dreaming big despite the odds. Now, symbolically, let me just exemplify this energy. I think all of us watched on Discovery Channel or on YouTube or any nature channel when animals are in big trouble. Either they're already in the jaws of the predator or their situation is absolutely hopeless, but they still cling on to life. And sometimes the miracle actually happens. Sometimes they actually escape despite all odds. And there is a very symbolic animal video which went viral on YouTube where there was a small little lizard and it was surrounded by hundreds of hungry snakes, and miraculously, driven by its instinct, driven by its intuition, if I can even call it like that, but it somehow outran the snakes. They jumped and they were sure to hit the target, and somehow it dodged hundreds of times and it survived, it escaped. This is one of those moments when we are that little lizard and everything is hopeless and we still make it. We still survive. And chances are the most positive expression of that Mars is actually our instincts. And the most positive expression of Mercury trine Mars is actually the intelligent, the ancient intelligence, the divine intelligence in our instincts. If we tap into it, well, we're capable of everything. And regardless what horrible aspects the sun forms from the sign of Leo, it's still its home sign. And what does that mean? It means that the love of life is greater than any obstacle, than any challenge. The love of life is the divine, basically. that is what the divine is on earth manifested, the love of life. And it is capable of true miracles. Well, thank you so much for listening. I do apologize that this video is a little bit too long, but it's going to be a tough week psychologically. And because we have all these retrograde planets and Mars is moving into shadow, well, this is where the challenge comes from within us. So it's not as easy to navigate through it as when all these planets were direct. And of course they were challenging. For example, all the coronavirus situation, when Saturn entered 0 degrees of Aquarius, when all the borders were closed and restrictions, it was just as hard. But because the challenge wasn't from within, we found the courage, strength, friendship, compassion, or whatever to navigate through it. But now it's the total opposite. The challenge comes from within, so we only have each other to help ourselves out of this turmoil. So if you feel defeated, if you feel that like this is suffocating you, do not be afraid to reach out. And if there is no person in your life, reach out to divine, because that is the most powerful trine in the sky. And even though these squares are so very defeating, so very frustrating, so very limiting, that trine enough, maybe it's enough to change all of this. Thank you once again. Wish everyone a safe week. Please look after each other, and even more importantly, look after yourselves and your inner child. Thank you so much again for listening. Until next time, bye for now.